Yo, what's going on guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm back with a brand new build. This is my take on a madness build. Let's take a look at it. It's at level 165, we've got 65 vigor, 60 strength and 33 faith. We're using the flame knot, which will boost the attacks from our weapons, and the Orpleen hard tier to boost our damage negation. And here's a quick look at the armour and talismans that we're using on the build. When it comes to our weapons, the most obvious thing on the build is that we're using the fingerprint shield. This is flame infused and it's equipped with shield bash. We've got two main weapons on the build, the first one being the Arumi whip, flame infused, and that's equipped with endure. Then we're also using the frenzied flame seal. Our second main weapon option on the build is the Celebrant's Cleaver, and this is also equipped with endure and also flame infused. We're then using the madness spells, the Flame of Frenzy, Inescapable Frenzy, the Howl of Shabriri, Frenzied Burst, and then finally our buff, the Golden Vow. And that's the build guys. This is Merv, and Merv's got quite a tragic story. I'll get into it as the video starts, but for now it's time for you lot to sit back, relax and enjoy. The first thing I want to say about this build guys, just to clear up any confusion, is that although I did say at the start of the video the buff that we're using is the Golden Vow, in quite a lot of these invasions you will see me using Flame Grant Me Strength, and there's a reason that I did decide to change. Initially I chose Flame Grant Me Strength because I thought it was a better fit for the build, having the buff to our damage and as well our fire damage, which does suit the build overall. But as you know, Flame Grant Me Strength is a body buff, and in using this it doesn't allow me to use that sweet boiled crab that I really like using. And without using the boiled crab I was finding that I was getting nuked quite a lot against some hard ganks. So in the end I decided to switch to the Golden Vow, which still gives us a nice damage buff, but it also gives us some extra damage negation, and as well as that it does allow us to use the boiled crab. And since I switched to this, I found that I was feeling a lot more comfortable taking, being able to take a bit more damage, and I just felt more comfortable with the build overall. So I did settle on the Golden Vow, but like I said, you will see me using Flame Grant Me Strength in some of these invasions before I decided to change it up. So this character's name is Merv, and Merv's tale is a tragic one. Let me tell you his story. You see, before this life of violence and chaos, Merv was but a humble farmer, sowing his crops, tending his cattle in some little quiet corner of the land between. He was happy and content, making an honest living to support his wife and young son, who he loved dearly. They didn't have much, but what they had was enough. They had each other and they were truly happy. However, tragedy was soon to come crashing down on Merv and his family and destroy every ounce of happiness Merv had ever known. On one fateful summer's day, Merv had left the farm to go and trade some crops and some livestock at the local farmers market to top up on some minor yet vital supplies to tend to the everyday needs of running the farm. He was equipped with his trusty whip and cleaver that he wouldn't leave the farm without. With his whip he would gently herd the cattle along the way, and his cleaver often came in handy to help clear any debris along the road, which was an often occurrence when travelling along some of the wild roads throughout the lands between. After a long, laborious yet successful day, having sold a small number of livestock in exchange for some meagre supplies, Merv set out to return to the farm. Having sold his cattle, he didn't have to worry about those on the return journey, so equipped with his whip and his cleaver and not much else, he enjoyed the scenes and the journey back to his loving farm and home. After a long walk, Merv approached the last hill that would lead him back to his home, a sight that he was often joyful to see after a long journey. However, what he saw this time rocked him to his very core. Rising up above the hill was a thick, dark column of smoke, and he was filled with an instant feeling of dread and panic as he rushed back to his farm to see what the problem was. To his absolute horror, Merv returned to find his farm, his house, his crops destroyed and in a blaze. The remainder of his cattle left slaughtered and bloodied in the field as the flames closed in on them to turn their lifeless bodies to ash. In his panic, Merv rushed to the front of his home, and what he saw there stopped him dead in his tracks. His wife, his son, laid on the floor, bloody and lifeless. In his absence, Merv's home and family had fallen victim to the merciless horde known as the Tarnished. The Tarnished invade worlds, leaving nothing but death and destruction in their wake, and they had set their sights on Merv's humble home. For days, Merv laid, unable to move through grief and remorse, surrounded by the charred remains of what once was his home. They'd gathered the strength days ago to bury his wife and son. He couldn't leave them for the flies. But after this he fell into the deepest, darkest corners of his mind, and there he stayed. How long had it been? Days? Weeks? Merv didn't know. He was truly a broken man. However, in the distance he saw a flicker of light in the darkness. A bright, beautiful, and yet somewhat terrifying flicker of orange light that seemed to be calling out to him. It was the frenzied flame of madness. In his despair, Merv had summoned the flame, and the flame had answered. He was terrified, no doubt about it, but he wanted this. He embraced the flame and felt its warmth flow through him. He arose out of the darkness. Madness had truly taken hold of him, but madness has given him the strength, the unnatural, otherworldly strength, and madness had given him the means to take revenge. He had the power to hunt down and destroy the Tarnished that had destroyed his world. His path was clear to him now, laid out as clear as day. With nothing but his whip and his cleaver, the only worldly possessions remaining from a life that seemed so long ago, he had set out on a torturous journey of death and revenge. Eventually, he gathered the strength to get up and leave to begin his new journey, his new quest in life. However, that's when he saw it, the great slab of stone. He had planned to use this as a headstone for his fallen beloved wife and son. However, it now had a new job. Before it could become the beautiful headstone that he had planned for his family, Merv vowed to soak it in as much tarnished blood as his body would allow. This would truly be a fitting tribute to his family. So there we go guys, that is the truly tragic tale of Merv the humble farmer. I know it's quite a grim tale, it's quite a sad story, but it's his story and he owns it. And what that does is give this build an absolute wealth of backstory, lore and character. So when I'm invading on it, I'm just so much more invested in Merv, do you know what I mean? When I'm invading with Merv, his backstory and his motives are always at the forefront of my mind. It just gives me so much more investment into the build, and it's just what I like to do when I'm making these characters. I love to give them a bit of backstory and lore. I just love it, it's just how I like to play the game, it's how I like to invade, and it's just something I'll always do when I make new builds. When I can, do you know, it doesn't always lend itself to a backstory when I make a build, but sometimes I have these ideas for builds and it's the story that drives the build forward rather than the kit that I'm using. So let's take a closer look at the build and all of the kit that we're using. So this is obviously a madness build. I've never committed to making a full madness build before. I've played around with some of the spells, but they've always been a part of a wider kit. You know what I mean? I've usually just handpicked one or two of the spells that I wanted to include in a certain spell rotation for any particular build. I've never committed to making a full-on, fully committed madness build. But with the story that I thought of for Merv and the way I wanted to play this build, I knew that madness was going to be the way forward. And once I kind of theorised it all, once I put the idea together, I started to get really excited about how I could put my own twist on a madness build. So we're obviously using all of the Frenzied Flame incantations, minus the Unendurable Frenzy. Only reason I'm not using that one is because I didn't really feel like it was necessary to include it on the build, and I don't really like it. I think it leaves you quite vulnerable for attacks, and as I said, I think I've got enough offense going on with the other incantations just to get by. So we've got our madness build up in the form of our incantations, but we've also got some madness build up in the form of the fingerprint shield. However, don't forget, a really important piece of lore when it comes to this character is that that isn't actually a shield that he's using. That is simply a massive slab of rock that he found laying around in his farm that he plans on using to turn into a tombstone to put at the heads of his wife's and son's shared grave. Only he vowed to soak it in as much tarnished blood as he could before he commits to putting it in the ground, a fitting tribute to his son and his wife. I absolutely love this little slice of lore for this character. It gives me so much justification in using the fingerprint shield. You know, I wanted to use the fingerprint shield on this build anyway. I was always going to use it, but I wanted to use it as an offensive tool, which is why I've put shield bash on it, and I'm not just using it as a turtle technique to hide behind and just block a load of damage. I'm trying to use it as an offensive tool, and I think that little slice of lore that he's using it to kill the tarnish with, and then he's going to place it in the ground at the head of his son and wife's grave site. I think that is just a really nice little bit of lore for this character. He's on a tale of revenge. He's gone crazy with grief and with sorrow. He's got the madness in him, and he just wants to kill people with the tombstone that he's going to use on their grave. It's very grim, it's very dark, but it just suits the character and the lore so well. Looking at the other weapons on this build, we're obviously using the Irumi Whip and the Celebrant's Cleaver, and these are both equipped with Endure, which helps us land some of the incantations, which can come in really handy. But in terms of these weapons, I really wanted them to fit the theme of the character. I wanted them to feel like something he would use on the everyday running of his farm, you know, so he's using the whip when he's like taking his cattle to market to help herd them along. Nothing too brutal, just a bit of gentle herding with the whip, and then he's got the cleaver that he's carrying all the time that you'd use like you'd use a machete, you know. You're going to be clearing a lot of debris out of the road in the wildlands between, so it's just two weapons that he's going to be carrying on him for practical reasons, not for fighting reasons, you know. They're the kind of tools that he's going to be using daily. So I wanted to make sure that they were part of his offensive kit when it came to invading, but I wanted them to feel like they could be tools used on his farm as well. All of our weapons on this build, including the shield, are all fire infused, and that was a very deliberate choice. I could have easily just put a blood infusion on these weapons for the build and made it even more deadly. You do often see that on the fingerprint shield when people use that. They often use shield crash on it instead of shield bash like I'm using, and they bleed infuse it, so you get ridiculous blood build up as well as a lot of madness build up, and it often makes it quite a ridiculous Ash of War to use, to be honest. It's very strong. But I wanted to use the flame infusion, and as I said, it was a very deliberate choice. I just think it suits the theme of the build so much better. Obviously he's infested with madness, using all of the madness incantations. There's a lot of fire going on with those incantations, so it makes sense to me that we're getting the same effect when we're hitting our opponents with our weapons. It's so satisfying seeing them erupt into flames. As you can see on this opponent now, he's erupting into flames constantly as we're attacking him. And combined with the incantations, I just think it just looks so cool, and it's very fitting for the whole feel of the build. The last part of the kit that I feel is worth mentioning on this one is that I'm using the Axe Talisman as part of our talisman lineup. This is going to increase the damage that we're getting on both of the charged attacks on our main weapons, and that really does suit both of our main weapons, the Whip and the Celebrant's Cleaver. They've both got a very unique charged R2 heavy attack, so using the Axe Talisman really does benefit both of those weapons. Makes our charge attacks extra deadly, and you've seen it a couple of times already throughout the video. Something I tried to do as a game plan on this build was inflict madness on our enemies, and then when they're suffering from that madness build up, charge up the heavy attack on whichever weapon we're using and hit them for some big damage. Good example in that invasion of why it's always a good idea to have the jar cannon as part of your kit as well when you can use it. This is obviously a high strength build, so I was always going to use the jar cannon as part of our offense. It doesn't fit into the theme of the build massively well, You know, I can't think of a reason why Merv the farmer would really have the jar cannon, but I don't think it looks too out of place from actually using it in the invasions. And as I said, I was always going to use it. It's a high strength build, so it just makes sense to have the jar cannon on those few occasions when you can use it. You know, I always try and use it on strength builds when I can. If I didn't have it on the build, I'd curse myself when it came to the, when it came to the invasion, where it would be the perfect time to use the jar cannon. So when I can use it, I'm always going to use it. So I think I've covered all of the main points that I wanted to talk about with this build. However, there is a bit of a small elephant in the room, and that is the Vikes War Spear. Obviously Vikes War Spear is the main weapon for Madness build up, and it would have been the perfect fit to include it on this build. But, I just thought it would have been a bit overkill using the Vikes War Spear, as well as the Madness Incantations and the Fingerprint Shield. But the main reason why I'm not using it, the absolute main reason, is that it just does not fit the theme or the character whatsoever. Where would Merv, the humble farmer, have ever found a Vikes War Spear? Do you know what I mean? I wanted to use the two weapons, the whip and the Celebrant's Cleaver. As I said before, the two weapons that Merv was using on his farm in his everyday life. I mean, look at this invasion. I'm fighting... It's almost like a mirror match. I'm fighting this guy. He's got the full Madness setup as well, but he's also using the Vikes War Spear. And it's just a bit much. I just think it's a little bit much, and would it have spoiled the build to use it? I don't know. You can see there how strong it is. He used it on us and he just absolutely destroyed us. I made a mistake going for the Howl of Shabriri in that instance, so I've got to hold my hands up. But I just think overall, if I'd have used the Vikes War Spear on this build, yes, I'd have probably been a lot more successful in a lot of invasions, but it wouldn't have been true to the build, and I'd have just always had that in my mind. I wouldn't have been happy using it. And the build as it is now, I do think it's quite strong, but I absolutely love the kit. I love the offensive tools that I'm using. It fits the theme, it fits the character, and I wouldn't change it for the world. So the Vikes Spear, I know it would have been strong, but it's a no from me. I'm sorry, I'm not using it. But yeah, I'm aware that it would have been a good choice for the build. Anyway guys, this is the last invasion of the video. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you've enjoyed hearing the tragic tale of Merv the humble farmer. But as I said, this is the last invasion of the video, so you guys just look after yourselves, look after each other, take it easy, enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you're doing, and I'll see you on the next video.